Hello, my name is Thomas Rampula, and this is Children's School Lunches and Obesity. Children's school lunches play a big role in childhood obesity. They could either prevent or cause towards obesity. The Journal of Human Resources states, as a result, if school lunches play a contributing role in the child obesity epidemic, making them healthier has the potential to impact a large number of children across socioeconomic status, race, and geographic boundaries. There is current legislation to help combat unhealthy school lunches, but it needs to be improved and enforced, as well as closing any loopholes. Obesity is a large problem in the United States that starts with children's school lunches because of unhealthy standards, technicalities in wording, and schools repeatedly failing to meet these nutritional standards. School lunches try to achieve a healthy level of nutritional values but focus more on calories than nutritional value. While there is a set minimum and maximum amount of calories for school lunches, there is not much legislation that focus on nutritional value instead of calories. According to the Washington Post, at least 80% of grains served in school lunch and breakfast each week must be considered rich in whole grains under the new policies, and while the sodium limit for school lunch and breakfast will remain the current level, there will be a 10% decrease required for the 2023-2024 school lunch year. As you can see in this visual aid from the Journal of Human Resources, schools have a very hard time meeting this requirement. Most schools have met the current calorie minimum and maximum requirements. As you can see in this visual aid from the Journal of Human Resources, schools generally meet the calorie requirements, but what is lacking is a concern for nutrition. This quote sets a new standard for school lunches that most schools will have a hard time meeting this requirement. This is only two of the many nutritional standards, and more should be established and be a major focus of the National School Lunch Program to help reduce obesity in the United States. The National School Lunch Program has some wording and restrictions that schools take advantage of. There must be these technicalities taken out of the program or more clarified to stop schools cutting corners. Some of these technicalities would be potatoes counting as a vegetable or tomato paste counting as a vegetable. And while these don't sound too bad, this would allow for French fries or pizza to be allowed as a vegetable, which aren't healthy foods. According to Business Insider, under new school lunch guidelines released by the United States Department of Agriculture, pastas made with potato, soy, or other starchy vegetable bread flours will be considered vegetable servings. And according to the Food Buying Guide for Children Nutrition Programs, tomato paste and tomato puree can be credited using the whole food equivalency rather than on the actual volume served. All other vegetables and vegetable purees credit based on the finished volume served. These two quotes show that tomato paste and potatoes can be considered vegetables. This is problematic because children would be served pizzas or French fries and have it count as one of their daily vegetables. These vegetables need to be more green and leafy to be considered healthy. If these loopholes are closed, this will improve school lunches and possibly help reduce childhood obesity in the United States. Many schools fail to meet the nutritional standards set in place by the National School Lunch Program. There must be consequences for schools that repeatedly fail to meet these set standards. According to Vanco Education, schools who are able to follow the set of meal requirements set by the National School Lunch Program are reimbursed for their costs based on the number of meals served. And not only that, they are paid an extra 7 cents on the dollar. Schools are reimbursed for their lunch costs if they meet the requirement. There should be harder punishments for schools that do not meet the requirements other than withholding state funding. If this is done, then obesity in the United States could be reduced starting at an early age. Obesity is a large issue in the United States that starts in schools with children's lunches because of unhealthy standards, technicalities, and wordings, and schools not meeting nutritional values set by the government. This can be solved by focusing more on the nutritional values than the calories, maximum and minimums, by closing the loopholes and tightening the requirements, and finally, imposing harsher punishments for schools that repeatedly fail to meet these basic minimum standards. If these are done, then childhood obesity in the United States could be prevented further. There are two questions. Why would calorie restrictions not be enough? And the answer to this would be just implementing the calorie standards, which are heavily focused on, would not help against obesity. Calorie standards prevent the meals from being too large or too small. They do not focus on how healthy they are. They just focus on the calorie count, which encourages high calorie foods, which generally are less healthy. And the second question would be, why do schools continue to fail meeting these standards? Schools have a hard time meeting these standards because of regularly switching requirements. When new governments come into charge, such as going from Democratic to Republican, these can further complicate things because they generally switch back and forth depending on how the economy is doing. If harsher standards are set, then schools must need to find new providers and new meals to serve to their students to meet the requirements. If these requirements are lessened, then schools generally go back to their old providers or start serving cheaper, unhealthier foods to keep costs low. Thank you all so much for listening to my speech on childhood obesity and school lunches.